At 2:17 in the morning, your heart produces its last effective beat. To everyone around you, the event looks almost insultingly simple. A line changes on a monitor. A pulse disappears beneath someone's fingers. Blood pressure collapses. There is now a time that can be written on a chart. But inside your body, there is no single switch labeled you. Your heart has stopped, but many of your cells have not. Electrical activity in the brain does not necessarily vanish at the exact same instant. Muscles, organs, genes, and microbes all follow different schedules. Even the word death can mean different things depending on whether you are asking a paramedic, a neurologist, a lawyer, a cell biologist, or a priest. So what actually happens after we die? The honest scientific answer begins with a correction. You do not die all at once. Death is a process with several borders, and the most unsettling question is not when your heart stops. It is when the world stops becoming an experience inside you. Start with the heart. When it suddenly stops pumping effectively, pressure in the arteries falls, and the brain loses the constant delivery of oxygen and glucose. It depends on, unlike a laptop, your brain does not keep a convenient emergency battery tucked behind the hippocampus. It is metabolically expensive, permanently hungry, and very bad at waiting for room service. In observations of sudden circulatory standstill, consciousness can be lost in roughly 8 seconds. Reviews of human and animal evidence generally find that obvious clinical consciousness and ordinary scalp EEG activity disappear within about 30 seconds after an abrupt loss of circulation. But those numbers are not universal countdowns. The cause of the arrest matters. So does the person's condition beforehand, the temperature, the remaining blood flow, and whether resuscitation begins. That is our first important boundary. Loss of consciousness is not the same thing as the instant death of every neuron. And EEG records synchronized electrical activity from large populations of cells near the surface of the brain. If the line becomes extremely quiet, it tells us that the kind of large-scale activity the electrodes can detect has collapsed. It does not mean every cell has vanished. Some cellular responses can persist after the familiar EEG disappears. A silent orchestra is not the same thing as an empty concert hall. And this is exactly why a stopped heart can sometimes be restarted. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation does not magically return the body to normal. Chest compressions provide only a fraction of ordinary circulation. But a fraction can matter. It can move some oxygenated blood toward the heart and brain, while clinicians try to correct the cause of the arrest and restore spontaneous circulation. This creates a strange medical interval. The person has no effective heartbeat of their own. They are unresponsive. Without intervention, the process will become irreversible. Yet if circulation returns soon enough, they may survive. People sometimes call this clinical death, but the phrase can cause confusion. In modern medicine, cardiac arrest is not automatically treated as irreversible death. It is treated as an emergency precisely because the boundary may not have been crossed yet. There is no universal minute at which every arrested brain becomes unrecoverable. Injury risk rises as effective circulation is absent. But biology is influenced by temperature, cause, prior health, and the quality of resuscitation. Profound cooling, for example, can change the rate at which tissues consume energy and suffer injury. That does not make the brain immortal, and it never makes waiting harmless. It shows why clinicians treat reversibility as a physiological question, not a kitchen timer. The same number of minutes can describe very different conditions inside two different bodies. So the dramatic flatline in a movie is not a metaphysical border. It is a crisis. Now move inside the brain. Neurons maintain tiny electrical differences across their membranes by continuously spending energy. Think of billions of microscopic pumps keeping charged particles on the correct sides of countless cellular walls. When blood flow stops, the fuel supply fails. The pumps begin to falter. Chemical balance deteriorates. Communication becomes disorganized. And if circulation is not restored, cells can enter a damaging wave of depolarization. This is less like turning off a lamp and more like a city losing power station. By station, the traffic lights fail. Phone networks drop. Water pressure falls. A few generators flicker on. For a short time, some buildings may even produce unusual bursts of activity. But that does not mean the city is functioning better than before. It means a complex system is breaking apart. That distinction matters because of one of the most sensational claims in death science. The dying brain may suddenly light up. In 2013, researchers recorded the brains of rats during experimentally induced cardiac arrest. For a brief period after circulation stopped, the animals showed a highly organized surge of gamma band activity and connectivity. In those rats, some measures exceeded the levels recorded while they were awake. That result was real. The leap people made from it was not. Rats cannot tell researchers whether they saw a tunnel, met a deceased relative, or remembered the first time they discovered cheese. Gamma oscillations are associated with many forms of brain processing. But gamma is not a tiny meter-labeled consciousness. Similar frequencies can appear in different states, and for different reasons. A later human study made the story even more intriguing, and even easier to exaggerate. Researchers examined EEG recordings from 4 comatose patients, who died after ventilatory support was withdrawn. 2 of the 4 showed a marked surge in gamma power and connectivity as their condition deteriorated. Some of that activity involved posterior brain regions, often discussed in theories of conscious processing. 4 patients, a signal in 2. No report from any of them about what, if anything, they experienced. The study demonstrated that selected dying human brains can generate organized high-frequency activity. It did not demonstrate that everyone becomes intensely conscious at death. It did not show a complete life review. And it certainly did not prove that the brain becomes more active than it has ever been in your life. That last claim takes a finding from a small rat experiment, mixes it with a tiny human sample, adds dramatic lighting, and hopes nobody checks the recipe. The signal is fascinating. The conclusion remains open, and then we reach the part people care about most: near-death experiences. Survivors of cardiac arrest and other life-threatening events sometimes describe extraordinary memories. A feeling of peace, a brilliant light, movement through a tunnel or landscape, separation from the body, encounters with people who have died. A panoramic review of life, a sense that the experience was more real than ordinary waking life. Peace is not universal. Some survivors describe fear, isolation, threatening figures, confusion, or the sensation of being pulled into an unwanted void. Others remember fragments with no grand narrative at all. And most people resuscitated from cardiac arrest do not return with a classic near-death story. The popular version has been edited by culture into a familiar trailer light, tunnel, reunion, wisdom, but the research record is messier. Human brains do not become more standardized just because they are in danger. These reports should not be mocked. Whatever their ultimate cause, they can be vivid, coherent, emotionally powerful, and capable of changing how a person lives for years afterward. Calling them just hallucinations is not an explanation. It is a label wearing a lab coat, but treating every report as proof of consciousness after irreversible death makes the opposite mistake. Prospective studies of cardiac arrest survivors have produced very different rates of near-death reports, ranging from a small minority to more than a third of the survivors interviewed. That variation is not surprising. Studies use different definitions and questionnaires. They interview different populations at different times. Many patients die before they can be interviewed, while others survive with memory problems, sedation, delirium, or brain injury. The sample available to science is therefore extremely selective. People who came close enough to death to require resuscitation, but recovered well enough to remember, communicate, and participate in a study. That creates a problem so obvious it is easy to miss. Every first-person account of dying comes from someone who did not remain dead. One of the most ambitious studies, known as AWARE-2, followed 567 in-hospital cardiac arrests. 53 people survived, and 28 completed interviews. 11 of those 28 described memories or perceptions that researchers grouped into several categories, including dream-like experiences and what they called recalled experiences of death. The researchers also tried something clever. They placed visual images where they could theoretically be seen only from an elevated viewpoint and played an auditory stimulus during resuscitation. Nobody identified the hidden image. One person identified the sound stimulus. During some resuscitations, the team also recorded EEG patterns that they interpreted as compatible with network-level cognitive activity, in some cases appearing 35 to 60 minutes into CPR. That sounds astonishing until you add the sentence that headlines often remove. This was during CPR. Chest compressions were pushing some blood through the brain. The patients were in a medical struggle between failed spontaneous circulation and attempted restoration. These recordings may teach us that the brain's capacity for organized activity can sometimes re-emerge during prolonged resuscitation. They do not show a brain thinking for an hour after irreversible death. The timing of the memories is even harder to establish. An experience later described as occurring while I was dead might have formed as circulation failed, during partially effective CPR, as blood flow returned, during sedation, or while the injured brain was reconstructing events during recovery. Memory does not contain a reliable timestamp. Your brain does not attach a little receipt saying, tunnel vision, 2 hours 18 minutes and 43 seconds am. Zero measurable circulation. This does not make the experience fake. It makes the mechanism difficult to locate. Researchers have proposed several plausible contributors. Reduced blood flow can narrow vision and alter sensory processing. Changes in oxygen and carbon dioxide affect neural activity. The brain's systems for mapping the body can become disrupted, contributing to a sensation of floating outside it. Neurochemicals released during extreme stress may alter pain, fear, and memory. Dreamlike processes, medications, and the fragmented return of brain networks may all contribute. No single mechanism currently explains every feature in every person, and there is no good reason to assume every report must have the same cause. Near-death experience may be one name placed over several different biological and psychological routes to a similar story. The famous life review deserves special caution. Memory is not a video archive stored in chronological folders. Each act of remembering is a reconstruction. The brain reassembles pieces, images, emotions, places, body sensations, expectations, and makes them feel continuous. Under unusual physiological conditions, networks that normally control access to those pieces may behave differently. That makes sudden, dense, emotionally charged memory sequences plausible. It does not let us predict their contents. You may have heard claims that the dying brain retrieves every moment you have ever lived, including trivial details from infancy. Science has not established that. Adults usually have very limited autobiographical memory from the first years of life, and a vivid image is not automatically an accurate recording. A white cat, a kitchen floor, or a forgotten face might appear in someone's report. That would tell us what they remembered or reconstructed, not that the brain had opened a perfect hidden archive. This is the midpoint where the mystery changes shape. At first, we asked what consciousness experiences after the heart stops. Now we have to ask a more basic question. When is a person actually dead? If circulation stops and cannot or will not be restored, death can be determined using circulatory criteria. But modern intensive care created another situation. Machines can move air into the lungs. Drugs can support blood pressure. The heart can continue beating because it has its own electrical machinery and receives oxygenated blood. Yet the brain may have permanently lost all function. This is death by neurologic criteria, commonly called brain death. Brain death is not a deep coma. It is not a vegetative state. It is not a prediction that someone is unlikely to recover. In a coma, some brain functions remain, and the condition may change. Brain death determination requires a known catastrophic brain injury and a standardized evaluation showing complete unresponsiveness, absence of brain and brainstem function, and inability to breathe independently. Clinicians must first exclude conditions that can imitate the examination, including certain drugs, severe hypothermia, and major metabolic disturbances. If parts of the examination cannot be completed, additional testing may be required under the applicable protocol. The important word is not inactive. It is permanent. Once death by neurologic criteria has been correctly determined, the person has died, even if a ventilator still makes the chest rise and a monitor still shows a heartbeat. The equipment is sustaining circulation through organs. It is not sustaining a hidden person trapped behind an unresponsive face. This distinction feels emotionally brutal, because our instincts were built long before intensive care. For most of human history, warm skin, breathing, and a beating heart meant alive. Technology separated signs that once failed together. Medicine then had to define which failure marked the loss of the organism as a functioning whole. But even brain death does not mean every human cell instantly dies. Skin cells, immune cells, reproductive cells, and cells inside organs tolerate oxygen loss differently. Under suitable conditions, some remain viable for hours, and certain specialized cells can persist longer. Organ transplantation depends on this separation between the death of a person and the continuing viability of some tissues. That is not a contradiction. A person is not a census of living cells. You are an organized process, circulation supplying tissues, lungs exchanging gases, hormones coordinating distant organs, and brain networks continuously integrating sensation, memory, emotion, and action. Individual components can remain chemically active after the integrated process has irreversibly ended. A violin may survive an orchestra. That does not mean the symphony is still playing. In the hours after circulation permanently stops, the body begins following several overlapping paths. Without blood distributing heat, body temperature gradually moves toward the surrounding environment. Gravity pulls blood toward lower areas. Muscles initially relax, then may stiffen as their cells run out of the energy needed to release molecular connections between muscle fibers. Later, as tissue breaks down, that stiffness fades. None of these changes is a perfect stopwatch. Temperature, clothing, body size, illness, medication, humidity, and the surrounding environment all alter the pace. Biology, even at the end, refuses to respect a neat production schedule. Inside cells, membranes and compartments begin to lose integrity. Enzymes once kept safely separated start digesting local structures, a process called autolysis. Meanwhile, the body's microbial communities enter a new ecological phase. The immune system and circulation are no longer maintaining boundaries. Some microbes decline, others multiply and move into new tissues. Over days, their communities change in patterns researchers are studying as possible clues to the postmortem interval. The body has not become biologically empty. It has become biologically ungoverned. Even gene activity can continue changing after death. Studies of donated human tissues have found tissue-specific shifts in RNA levels during the postmortem interval. Some of those shifts appear to reflect active local regulation rather than simple random decay. This has produced another crop of irresistible headlines. Genes switch on after death. True, in a limited cellular sense. Misleading, if it makes you imagine the dead body launching a coordinated backup program. These are local molecular reactions in tissues, under stress. They are not evidence that the person is thinking, choosing, or attempting to return. Once again, activity is not the same thing as an experiencing self. Eventually, the materials that briefly formed one human life are redistributed. Microbes metabolize them. Insects and other organisms may participate depending on the environment. Molecules enter air, soil, water, plants, and other living systems. The boundary that kept one body chemically distinct becomes progressively less definite. There is something almost rude about how ordinary this is. The atoms do not hold a meeting. Carbon does not observe a minute of silence. Nature does not treat human matter as a special category. The organization ends, and the materials continue. So is that all? Does science prove that there is nothing after death? Science has not proved a metaphysical nothing, because nothing is not an object you can place under a scanner. Science tests observations, signals, predictions, and interactions. If some form of existence produces no measurable effect in the physical world, then current scientific methods cannot confirm it or rule it out. What science can say is narrower and stronger. There is currently no verified evidence that a person's consciousness continues after the irreversible loss of the brain functions required to generate consciousness. Every confirmed memory, report, and measurement we possess comes from a living brain, a dying brain, or a brain being resuscitated, not from a person who crossed irreversible death and returned with independently testable information. That conclusion may fit some religious beliefs in conflict with others. Science cannot settle the spiritual question by quietly redefining it as an e.g. problem. Religion, philosophy, and personal experience ask what death means. Biology asks what systems fail, in what order, and what can still be measured. Confusing those questions produces bad science and shallow theology at the same time. An efficient little disaster. Return now to 2017 in the morning. The heart stops. Within seconds, the stable flow of experience probably collapses. If circulation is restored, the brain may rebuild enough of its coordinated activity for the person to wake, sometimes carrying vivid memories from somewhere near the boundary. If circulation cannot be restored, cellular failures spread. Large-scale brain activity disappears. At some point, the loss becomes permanent. Hours later, many individual cells are still completing their own smaller endings. Days later, the body has become an ecosystem in transition. There was never one switch. There was a cascade, circulation, consciousness, electrical coordination, cellular integrity, chemical boundaries. Science can watch much of that cascade from the outside. What it cannot do is stand inside the final loss of a first-person world and report back. That may be why death frightens us, in a way that ordinary unconsciousness does not. You have fallen asleep thousands of times. You surrender awareness because you expect morning to return it. Death is the same grammatical move with the promise removed. There is no later version of you scheduled to notice the missing interval. And yet the science of dying points back toward life with surprising force. Consciousness is not stored safely somewhere behind your eyes. It is being produced now expensively, delicately, continuously, by a living body keeping billions of relationships in balance. The taste of coffee, the irritation of traffic, a friend laughing before they can finish the sentence, sunlight moving across a wall. None of these is background material waiting for a more important life to begin. They are the process itself. One day the heart will make its final effective beat. The body's clocks will separate. The world will continue making light, noise, weather, and mornings. The question science cannot yet answer is whether anything follows for you beyond that boundary. But it can tell us something almost as strange. Death may not be the moment you leave the world. It may be the first moment the world continues, but no longer becomes an experience inside you.